Vice President Kamala Harris and the President of Mexico are expected to hold a joint news conference, capping the second day of her trip to the Northern Triangle in an effort to address the root causes of migration to the U.S. Natalie Brand reports from the White House.
On day 2 of her first foreign trip, Vice President Kamala Harris pushed to strengthen ties with our neighbor to the south.
I strongly believe that we are embarking on a new era.
The two countries signed a memorandum to establish a partnership focused on development in the Northern Triangle in an effort to address the root causes of why people are fleeing Central America for the U.S.-Mexico border. Mexico's president was asked if he'll do more to enforce border security.
We will touch on that subject.
Pero atendiendo las causas.
But always addressing the fundamental root causes.
The vice president's trip this week comes as the Biden administration continues to address what was a record influx of unaccompanied minors to the border this spring. Federal data shows nearly 17,000 remain in U.S. custody. The administration has also released a new report showing 2,100 children who were separated from their families near the border during the Trump administration may still be apart from their parents.
One of the challenges that we walked into is the lack of data. And that we knew that would take some time.
The Department of Homeland Security notes some of those children may have found a way to reunite with family, but the government does not have records documenting their reunifications. Natalie Brand, CBS News, the White House.